Hey, this is Blondeguygamer, and welcome to another In Retrospect. Finally. After over 3 years, sorry about that. For this episode, we're going to go over a trilogy of first-person shooters that I am a pretty big fan of, the Timesplitters games. I've wanted to talk about these games in some capacity for quite a while, if only because I have fond memories of playing these games ever since they came out. Well, with the second and third games anyway. I didn't have a PlayStation 2 back then, and it wasn't until a few years ago I even picked up a copy of the first game. Better late than never, right? Just like my videos. While I don't really have a nostalgic connection to Timesplitters 1 like I do with the later two entries, I was still curious to see how it all started. So let's not waste any more time and get to it, shall we? Yeah, I should keep the time hunts to a minimum. Timesplitters was released on October 23rd in the year 2000 exclusively for the PlayStation 2 as one of its launch title games, being published by Eidos Interactive and developed by Free Radical Design, a team comprised of former Rare employees, with David Doak as the lead designer. And if that name sounds familiar, he and other team members such as Steve Ellis and Carl Hilton previously worked on the critically acclaimed GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64, leaving Rare during the development of Perfect Dark to form Free Radical, with Timesplitters as their debut game. So while Perfect Dark is considered a spiritual successor to GoldenEye, Timesplitters can also be considered one, as they do have their fair share of similarities. So what is Timesplitters all about? Well, it has time in the title, so time travel. Specifically, the story mode takes place throughout different time period locations from 1935 to 2035. You select between one of two individual characters for every level, run through them while dealing with enemies along the way, grab the objective item, and exit through a portal that's usually back at the start of the level. And when you do retrieve said items, the titular Timesplitters tend to show up, which are mutated humanoids with time powers that spawn in endlessly to attack until you finish the level. And that's honestly about it. For something that is called a story mode, there's no in-game narrative as to what exactly is going on, no backstories on any of the playable characters, and only very brief objectives with no details as to why you're even doing them in the first place. I assume there is a short story synopsis in the manual, but my copy doesn't have one. The back cover just says that Timesplitters are ripping through time and space to do evil stuff, so go stop them. And according to the game's Wikipedia article, the opposing forces in every time zone have sided with the Timesplitters. For power, I guess? Though much like many retro games with minimalist, if any at all, narratives that are often only in the manuals, this probably won't bother you as the premise is straightforward enough to just jump in and play. But if you're looking for more cohesive reasons behind the time traveling aspect and the Timesplitters, you're not going to get it in the first game. That is also true if you're expecting a lengthy game, as most of the 10 levels can be completed quickly, often within 5 minutes once you know the layouts. Because of that, the story mode can easily be beaten within an hour or two. In order to make up for the short single player, the game does offer some replayability, as each single player level can be consecutively played on 3 difficulties, with easy having the least amount of foes and being more simplistic versions of levels, while normal and hard increase the challenge substantially. While I have played a fair share of first-person shooters, I would only consider myself being competent enough at them. And this mode can throw you off guard as there isn't much room for error, especially on the harder settings. You'll need good reflexes and know where and when enemies will be, because while there are a few medkits and body armors here and there, they are limited, so you can't afford to get shot very much. And since the stages aren't that long, when you do die, you have to restart the entire level. There are no checkpoints. For me, clearing the story mode on easy wasn't too much of a problem, but on normal, the increase of difficulty did get to me, to the point where I was nervously inching my way through levels to try and prepare myself to what's coming. That's not to say they aren't doable, as the game does give you enough weapons, ammo, and a generous auto-aim. It's just that a good amount of persistence, memorization, and quick shooting will be required. Fortunately, the controls for the first Timesplitters are still pretty good for being one of the earliest dual analog stick first-person shooters. Though since this control scheme was still a pretty new concept, I imagine not everyone took to it well at the time. The most infamous example of that was the GameSpot review of Alien Resurrection for the PlayStation, another dual analog console FPS that actually came out about 2 weeks prior to Timesplitters, in which the reviewer criticized its controls that ironically became a standard for first-person shooters we all know and love today. Though, to be fair, if you never played an FPS with a twin-stick controller before, I can see it being awkward to get used to at first. Thankfully, you can change the controls to whatever is the most comfortable. Though with the manual aiming toggle, a component that was brought over from GoldenEye, I found it to be a bit overly sensitive to precisely aim with, and there isn't a way to adjust that sensitivity. I usually just bring it up as a stationary reticle and strafe with it in order to line up better shots. Another small gripe is that the activate button is only really used for a couple of things in the entire game, one of which was for unlocking a door with a computer console in a level, but because I never had to activate anything else up to that point, I didn't even know I needed to press a button until I looked it up. Those aside, I still felt compelled to at least beat the story mode levels on normal. Well, except for the mansion. This stage is a pain in the ass. Not only do you have to contend with zombies that can only be killed by shooting their heads off, there are enemies with shotguns that can take off huge chunks of health if you don't take them out immediately, and there's even zombies with shotguns. Goes against most zombie lore, but that's here in this game. Yeah, I basically gave up after several attempts for now. It's too full of cheap enemies for its own good. Even though I didn't complete every level on normal, there was a good amount of things I did unlock, such as additional maps for the arcade mode, and simply beating the story on easy grants you the challenge mode. These are 7 types of themed challenges with 3 levels each. They range from special team death matches, killing a number or waves of enemies, escorting a slow-walking target safely to a goal, to breaking a number of glass windows. The challenges are a welcome addition for the lacking single-player content, but some are more tedious than others, such as the one where you have to shoot a bunch of barrels that I'm surprised have no fish in them, or this challenge where it's complete and utter chaos. Also, the only challenge I didn't complete was the very last one where you have to defend a bunch of crystals with a turret that's a bit cumbersome to use against an unforgiving onslaught of enemy waves. But even without doing that, you do unlock more characters and other things for the multiplayer, something I should finally start talking about. It's clear that a big part of this game was the multiplayer, as you can play with up to 4 people in the arcade mode, provided you have a multi-tap for more than 2, and you're able to do all the story mode missions cooperatively with a buddy as well. In arcade mode, you have a selection of game types that vary a little depending on what map you pick. There's the expected free-for-all and team deathmatches, capture the flag, or rather bag in this case, bag tag to hold on to a bag the longest, escort, which is like the aforementioned challenges, except you play on protection and attacking teams, last stand in that you defend yourself or key objects from waves of enemies. These are also reused from challenge levels, but being able to play these in multiplayer is neat to see an early example of a horde mode. And lastly, there's Knockout, a variation of Capture the Bag with more bags to grab. It is a fairly standard set of modes, but what really makes Timesplitters shine in this department is the amount of customization. You can set the score and time limits to your liking and play nearly all the modes with bots, picking from character sets and choosing who will be on and their skill level. And let's not forget what weapons will be used, either from presets or making your own custom lineups. The arsenal in Timesplitters does have a decent range covering vintage, modern, and futuristic styles, though it's not the most diverse of the series. A few do have secondary fire options, such as the sci-fi rifle's sticky grenade-like shot, but otherwise don't stand out all that much. Still, these guns are incredibly satisfying to use. I mean, what other game has you dual-wield miniguns in one match, then throwing bricks in another? Yes, the latter is a weapon you can unlock, by the way. While a little tricky to throw, these things are surprisingly deadly, even though they're all in all just another brick in the wall. What? Oh, come on, you expect me not to make that kind of joke? It's either that or more bad time puns. All these options and more provide plenty of possibilities for you and your friends to mess around with. It's basically taking the frantic nature of GoldenEye's multiplayer and cranking up to ridiculous levels, and I love being able to do that. And if all that wasn't enough, there's being able to make your own maps in the Map Maker. As far as level editors go, the one in Timesplitters is actually pretty easy to get into, despite looking a little complicated at first. You basically pick among a list of pre-made sections that drag and drop, being able to construct multi-level rooms and connected hallways between them. Drop in some weapons, spawn points, pick the theme, maybe even tinker with the lighting, and you have the tools to make maps of your own volition. Within the memory limits at least. Now, I'll admit, I've never gotten too deep with the map makers in these games, and with this being the first, this has the least amount of options. Even so, this is still something that could be fun to experiment with, and I'm sure some of you have or could come up with something more creative than my half-assed efforts. One final thing to note about this game are the unlockable cheat options for even more shenanigans. Some you get by completing levels and challenges, while others are obtained by finishing stages within a specific time and difficulty setting, not unlike how you unlock cheats in the original GoldenEye. Those, along with all the wacky characters and maps you can unlock, will give you some incentive to keep playing. And it'll look decent while doing so, with crisp environments running at a smooth 60 frames per second. Granted, the character models are the most dated here, but they fit in with the over-the-top style the series is known for. The music is pretty good too, composed by Graham Norgate, who previously contributed to titles such as GoldenEye and Blast Corps while at Rare, provides energetic and ambient tracks to bring everything all together. While I wouldn't say it's his best work in the series, it is a good start. That is pretty much how I would describe the first Timesplitters, a solid, if somewhat basic and unbalanced, introduction to the series premise. Finally playing through Timesplitters 1 was nice to see how it all got started, as there are certainly staples here that will continue on. It just leaves a little to be desired that the later entries do bring in. Timesplitters is by no means a bad game, as it did get favorable reviews at the time and is arguably one of the more standout PlayStation 2 launch titles. Nowadays, it's an inexpensive, zany first-person shooter that gets overshadowed by the superior follow-ups due to it being the oldest and most simplistic of the series. I can still recommend the game if you want to complete the trilogy or if you really want to start with this one and work your way up from there. So with the groundwork laid out and success of a launch PS2 game, Free Radical went right to work on Timesplitters 2, with David Doak and Steve Ellis leading development as both directors and producers. It's here I got my first chance to play a Timesplitters game, and boy did I not regret it. Published by iOS again, Timesplitters 2 arrived in North America on October 9, 2002 for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, going with a multi-console release. This alone was a wise move to bring accessibility to the franchise, as someone like me only had a GameCube then. And funnily enough, there was going to be a Game Boy Advance version called Timesplitters Advance, but that never got released. That kind of blows my mind that was even being developed, and I hope it somehow gets released online someday. As far as this sequel goes, just about everything has been improved and expanded upon. For starters, the single-player campaign actually has a proper story. In the year 2401, humanity is at war with the Timesplitters, who plan on using the power of time crystals in order to time travel and mess with Earth's history.
Crystals, of course. No!
Marines Sergeant Cortez and Corporal Hart arrive at a taken-over space station to stop the Timesplitters, who are in the process of using a portal to go to various time periods with the crystals. So Cortez goes in after them, with Hart staying behind to defend the portal room. Upon traveling to 1990 Siberia, Cortez discovers that he is now a different person, effectively jumping into every hero and heroine of their respective time periods. It's a clever way as to how and why you play as different characters throughout the game. Though beyond the first level introduction, each time era after just represents the protagonists with their own story and goals in mind. It just so happens that they coincide with the time crystals and splitters, which gives the characters a little more depth to work with as opposed to, well, practically nothing before. A crystal is required to grab in every stage, and like in the first game, Timesplitters will usually spawn in continuously when the crystal is collected until you reach an exit portal. However, grabbing crystals is the only common goal, as every level will have their own objectives you'll need to complete. And depending on the difficulty, ones that were not present or simply optional before will become required to do so. Boss fights are also introduced for some of the stages. Even though you can pretty much just fire away at most of them, they are a welcome addition. Levels are now longer because of these inclusions, being much more fleshed out with a wider range of distinct time zones from as old as the Wild West to the distant future of Planet X. Variety also comes in the form of how every level is played out to suit the era. One has you meeting and escorting an informant for an objective, the carryover from the escort mode from the first game I'm sure. Another has you sneak behind someone and avoid security cameras for the first half of the level, using a handheld computer that all the playable characters have because of Cortez I guess, to show a mini-map and vision cones to the cameras. And another has you getting scientists to defuse bombs before a timer runs out. Oh crap, I'm running out of time. How ironic. Come on, hurry up and defuse the bomb! No! Well, thankfully there are now checkpoints you can retry from, though only one about halfway in every level, and it keeps whatever health and armor you had then. Timesplitters 2 is a little more forgiving in that regard, but you still shouldn't be super reckless as health and armor pickups continue to be precious resources. Like the first game, playing levels on easy will have you go through more simplified versions, while the higher difficulties give you fuller fledged levels and objectives with more of a challenge. And in keeping with trends from the previous Timesplitters, there is also one level that tested my patience even on the normal difficulty. The Robot Factory. Anyone who has played through this game knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's one of the longest levels and one hell of an endurance test. If you thought zombies with shotguns was bad, try heavy-duty robots with homing rocket launchers. Unlike the mention, I did do it with enough persistence, because I'd never actually beaten this game on normal and wanted to do at least that for this video. And it was definitely something. I don't want to imagine that level on hard. The rest of the game fortunately didn't give me too much grief, with the controls being just as responsive and customizable as ever. Although with the GameCube controller for this version, using its C-stick on top of the still overly sensitive manual aiming can be unwieldy. Not to mention the small D-pad for switching weapons and zooming in and out while aiming with specific weapons. And since you can pick up several guns, switching to what you want can be a bit of a hassle, to where I sometimes resorted to using the pause menu to select what I wanted instead. I will admit the GameCube controller is not the most optimal for first-person shooters, but I don't mind it so much here since I am used to playing this game with one, and it's such a well-made game that what little control issues I had were not huge problems in the long run. It also helps that the levels are wonderfully crafted, leading you from one place to the next in a seamless journey through every stage. There's also a surprising amount of detail and interaction put in, even for things that aren't needed, but they did it anyway to make every area that more substantial. There was even finding a few Vector-style minigame cartridges and playing them from the inventory menu, such as the Anaconda game in Siberia, the Retro Laner game in Neo Tokyo, and the third is Retro Racer, that I actually never found myself. Where is it again? Oh, the Robot Factory on hard. I'll pass. Still, the amount of work done in this game, let alone for the single-player campaign, is staggering. The Siberian Dam level is a perfect showcase of that, being a great first stage that actually took up about half of the development time to make. And yeah, a Russian dam level, that seems a little familiar, doesn't it? Same with the red health and blue armor meters, more objectives on hard difficulties, those GoldenEye roots are definitely showing here. Heck, that pretty much became a selling point with the front cover having an excerpt from Electronic Gaming Monthly proclaiming the game as an heir apparent to GoldenEye. They weren't wrong, and knowing that was how I got interested in Timesplitters 2 in the first place thanks to that and Nintendo Power. Of course, taking from their previous work wasn't the only inspiration for Radical put into this game. I mean, just look at Neo Tokyo. It's all dreary and rainy, walkways tell you to cross now, police cars hover around, it takes place in 2019, which just ended, holy shit. So yes, this is a blatant but spot-on homage to the original Blade Runner. Now I'm wondering what a 2049 level would be like. I could go on about how every stage pays tribute or pokes fun at pop culture, so I'll just say that Free Radical clearly had a blast creating every level scene to make them really fun to go through. Robot Factory is difficult notwithstanding. As much as I do praise the campaign mode, it is just 10 stages like the first game, with the last level actually being the shortest. While much more fulfilling than the story mode in Timesplitters 1, it won't take you that much longer to go through. So what would be next after that? You could play it again on a harder difficulty or with a friend in the returning co-op, or you could check out some of the other modes. Starting with Arcade, there are now two categories for it, Arcade League and Arcade Custom. Arcade League is a series of scenario matches against the AI. Completing these within certain goals will reward you with bronze, silver, or gold trophies, some of which will unlock multiplayer characters, maps, and cheat effects. There are quite a few of these within 3 tiers to keep you busy, and there's even platinum trophies if you do really well, but are optional and don't give extra rewards, so you don't have to stress about those for completion's sake. There's also the returning challenge mode to earn trophies too. These challenges are more unique in that you do tasks such as collecting bananas in a maze as a monkey within a time limit, stealth your way past enemies to a goal, or even classic throwbacks of Timesplitters 1 style story missions. A few are returning challenge types as well, but with new twists to give a fresh take on them. With the challenge in Arcade League, you'll have plenty of content, and that's just what the single player has to offer. Arcade Custom is the bread and butter multiplayer, and if you thought the first game had extensive options, wait till you see what was added in 2. For starters, the speed of the matches can be selected from 3 settings, though I tend to just leave it on normal as I feel the default is a good enough pace without going too crazy. The deathmatch and bag modes are back along with a plethora of new match types. There's Elimination, where players have lives, Shrink, in which the lower the rank, the smaller you are and harder to get shot at, Flame Tag, where you try to be on fire the least amount of time. Oh right, being on fire is a thing in this game, and since there's no stop, drop, and roll button, the only ways to put yourself out is to either run to a water source or use a fire extinguisher on yourself. The latter I didn't even know you could do until recently. Continuing on with the new modes, there's Virus, where whoever is the last person not to be tagged by the fire virus wins. Vampire has a bloodlust meter that if filled up before you make a kill, you die. Leech is sapping health away from others into your own when you damage them. Regeneration as your health slowly recover over time. Thief is grabbing coins dropped by players that are killed. Gladiator is a mode where players can only score kill points as a gladiator and whoever else can take out the gladiator gets that power. Zones are capture points you take and hold to earn points. Assault has one team advancing towards objectives while the other defends. And lastly, there's Monkey Assistant, where the player in last place periodically gets some monkey friends spying in to help them out. All of these are great additions to give you and up to 3 friends countless hours of multiplayer fun, or even up to 16 through LAN connections, that the GameCube version doesn't have. Wouldn't be the only time GameCube owners got the short end of the multiplayer stick, trust me. Still, 4 players and bots with all the maps and options old and new at your disposal is more than enough. One new option are the power-ups that can be picked up on the maps, giving you temporary boosts of speed, damage up, cloaking, and smaller size. Selecting your loadout is more fun than ever thanks to the weapon selection. The firearms in Timesplitters 2 got a considerable upgrade, being much less drab looking and more varied thanks to the wider range of time periods they come from. The secondary fire is utilized a little more for select weapons as well, such as the Soviet S-47 and plasma rifles now using grenades as separate ammo pickups. There's also a lot more characters to play as and unlock, all of which now have entertaining descriptions in a gallery you can read up on. And they even have different stats and character abilities that you can toggle on or off. Though with the latter, it's only noticeable with the more agile character bots doing things like somersaults to try and be more evasive. And of course, let's not forget the map editor making its return as a great tool to make your own maps. Except now you are able to create your own custom story levels, complete with objectives you can place and write your own descriptions for them. Although it's not the most user-friendly thing to set up triggers and game logic in order to get a working scenario going, but once you figure those out, then you're on your way to make your own fun levels in this game too. Timesplitters 2 was great to play back then and it's still great to play now. It's aged more gracefully than Timesplitters 1 thanks to the improvements made. Whether it's the amount of content or the graphical fidelity with better detailed environments and cutscenes that are very memorable and expressive with the much better looking, but still cartoony, character models while still running at 60 FPS. The music is also fantastic for this game. Graham Norgay brings some of his best work here in my opinion with music that perfectly fits with every campaign level as well as some really catchy tunes for the multiplayer maps. It's one of my favorite game soundtracks that you may have heard me use before in other videos and will likely still use. In case you couldn't tell how much I've gushed over it, Timesplitters 2 is a high recommendation to play. So much so that you don't even really need to play the first one and can jump right into the second game like I did back then. It's one of the most improved sequels I can think of, and it shouldn't be all that difficult or expensive to find a copy for whichever of the three systems you prefer. After a successful second game, another Timesplitters would follow to complete the trilogy, but not before Free Radical released Second Sight in 2004, a fairly ambitious stealth action game involving psychic powers. I may actually talk more about this in a separate short review since it is a pretty unique and often overlooked game from Free Radical. Until then, let's finish off the series with Timesplitters Future Perfect. Coming out on March 21st in 2005 in North America, Future Perfect was released on the same three systems. I stay consistent with getting the GameCube version. David Doak and Steve Ellis reprised their director roles. However, one thing that is different is that the publisher was Electronic Arts instead of Eidos. Now, some of you are probably thinking, oh, EA got involved, no wonder the series died. No, there's actually other reasons why that happened.
When I'm alone tonight, I'm gonna be thinking about this moment.
We'll talk about that later. Starting off with the single-player story, it begins with Sergeant Cortez returning to Earth with the time crystals he recovered during Timesplitters 2.
Say, where's Corporal Hart?
Corporal who?
Anyway, the first level eases you in with some non-intrusive tutorials as you head back to the base, all the while helping and fending off some slightly more grotesque Timesplitters and a mysterious group of assassins that you won't know what their deal is until much later. After that, Cortez rendezvous with the General who informs him of a plan to eliminate the Timesplitters once and for all, which is to use the time crystals to travel back to when they were used in order to destroy them from the source. We then meet Chief Scientist Officer Anya, who pinpoints the highest concentration of crystal activity on a Scottish island in 1924 before it got destroyed. She then gives Cortez an uplink to the time machine since he is naturally the one being sent to do the task and can't catch a break. Unlike the last game, Cortez is directly sent to the time period thanks to Anya, who also stays in contact for support through the uplink, and you stay as Cortez during the whole adventure. That doesn't mean there won't be other allies, as in just about every era Cortez teams up with a character, both familiar and new, on their own agendas that tie in with his, being AI partners for some of the levels and serving as the player 2 characters while playing co-op. I'd say the first thing you'll notice right away is the story presentation, as it's another step up in quality, and there's some pretty decent twists and turns along the way. But what makes it great is that it never takes itself too seriously, particularly with Cortez's cheesy one-liner that falls completely flat in the interactions with the characters. There is a lot of well-placed humor throughout the campaign that makes for a very entertaining playthrough. I actually enjoy the story mode so much that I often find myself quoting it, especially with friends that like the game just as much as I do. I'll actually prove that right now just with Cortez's lines alone. Hey, Unreal!
What?
It's time to split!
Ah, I'm ready.
Whoa, Anya, did you see that?
I don't think much of this weapon.
I'm never eating calamari again.
Let's blow this popsicle stand. Hey, wait a minute. Did you seriously bring me into your Timesplitters retrospective just for this?
Yeah, since we always quote Future Perfect together.
And not to play any co-op or multiplayer?
Well, it's kind of difficult to plan for that when we live as far apart as we do. So unless time travel actually becomes possible when we go back to before this, we're just gonna have to settle on this bit because I know you're also a big fan of Timesplitters and I wanted to include you in some way. Password's Lollipop.
Sweet!
Of course, it's not just the humor that makes it fun, as the levels are just as engaging with a few new things thrown in, such as Cortez using his uplink as not only a mini-map, but can also manipulate objects with it. Though it's no gravity gun from Half-Life 2, as it's mostly used for scripted sequences in order to progress and grabbing some out-of-reach items. Still, a neat addition that doesn't detract too much from the core gameplay. That also applies with vehicles that you can drive in a few levels. Those are fun inclusions too. Other new tweaks include grenades now being a separate pickup that you throw, even having slight type variations depending on the time era, and using the D-pad to toggle between alternate fire modes for weapons. You can also do melee strikes with weapons, though I honestly rarely use them. Partly because I forget you can even do that, and partly because you don't really need to. I guess it doesn't hurt to have it as a desperation or stealth move. However, one new mechanic that is used all throughout are the time loop portals, where at specific points, Cortez will run into his future self from later in the level, often needing to do something with him. Then later on you find that same time loop and help the past Cortez. These parts were always a cool way of incorporating actual time traveling aspects in the game, even if scripted sequences, and being another aspect of the co-op mode. As much as I do love the campaign in Future Perfect, the structure is a little more slower paced than 2. Not just with having more dialogue and cutscenes mind you, as those are fun to listen and watch respectively, but in the level structure as well. There's a little more waiting around, a little more puzzle solving, a little more strategy needed for bosses, a little more emphasis on optional stealth portions, and being a little more straightforward in terms of objectives. They are still well-made levels that don't drag on and have good variety, it's just that with them being longer and more elaborate than 2, it does lose some of that faster-paced nature the first 2 games had. If anything, I'd say 2 has a good balance, while Future Perfect is the most contemporary in terms of a modern first-person shooter. Again, that's not a bad thing as it is a fulfilling story mode and I do like the expanded nature of it. Even with most of the time zones being split into 2 levels, they differentiate themselves enough to warrant them. Like how the first level of 1969 has you infiltrate a base, while the second has you go through a train, which I'm convinced was inspired by the train level in GoldenEye in case you thought they didn't bring back anything more from that, and other movie references that they sneak in. Just from the story mode alone, I had a good time revisiting this game too. The controls, even on a GameCube controller, are top notch and there's finally good precision aiming that isn't overly sensitive. It holds up well not just there, but also the visuals as they got an upgrade in detail, even having actual hands holding the guns and doing reload animations. Though there was an innate charm to the floating gun models in the previous games, but I still appreciate the graphical overhaul done for Future Perfect. Heck, the game even now has blood, which did raise the game rating because of that, yet it still retains a lot of the cartoonish nature from the first 2 games, all the while still maintaining 60 FPS with widescreen and progressive scan support to show how well made this game is. Although there was one instance where I got stuck behind an NPC I was supposed to follow, and another where my partner also got stuck and I couldn't proceed. Fortunately, there are more checkpoints as a result of the longer levels, so I was able to restart from one, so those oddities didn't really sour my enjoyment all that much. Of course, we can't forget the rest of the game as we have the returning arcade league modes and challenges, having you once again earn trophies and unlock rewards. Doing these are still fun, especially with the nuances that Future Perfect bring in. There's some good new takes on similar returning challenges, along with plenty of brand new stuff that's pretty out there, like the Brass Monkeys one where you're curling monkeys on a Siberian dam lake, which I actually did really well on and even got the Platinum Trophy. I guess my Canadianness really came through here. And yeah, the monkeys are still kind of a thing in Future Perfect, maybe even more so. Multiplayer! To no surprise, it's still really good! The arcade custom in Future Perfect is perhaps the best multiplayer in the series. Well, unless you wanted to play Regeneration Leech or Flame Tag, those aren't here. But honestly, those and the style choices were probably removed to make Future Perfect a less bloated multiplayer experience. The new maps are quite good, like the subway with a humorous intercom announcer and a switch that unleashes trains into unsuspecting players, or the disco club with interactable instruments. There's even a few returning areas from the previous games, even if altered slightly. There's no remote turrets to control in the training grounds, for instance. Still, you pretty much have a culminations of series options available with a crazy selection of characters and weapons to use. With the former, they stand out even more with having some amusing animations and quips when selected, a returning thing from the first Timesplitters, believe it or not. Here's some of my favorites.
Got any spare brain, buddy?
Time to unleash the arse-kiculator.
Hope I don't have an accident in here. Oh no.
I say, it's rather warm in here.
Bite my crunchy brown ass.
As you can see, the sense of humor extends to the rest of the game too. With the weapons, Future Perfect has a great lineup, and definitely look better from the improved graphics. You can have just as much, if not even more fun in Future Perfect's multiplayer. You could even play matches online! On the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions. See? Told you it wouldn't be the first time. I guess GameCube games online were reserved just for fans to start online. Even so, the servers have been shut down for years, but it might still be possible to do with something like X-Link Kai. Still, I would have loved to play this online in some official capacity. Even then, there's still stuff like the Map Maker, which is naturally the most advanced in Future Perfect with its improvements, such as being able to stack rooms, add vehicles, make more open areas with skyboxes that you can adjust the weather no less, and place decorative items. Though you can only play as Cortez for custom story missions, but at least you have more options to compensate. So while I really like 2, especially now after seeing how much they built up after the more simplistic first game, I do feel that Future Perfect is my go-to Timesplitters game in terms of its production values and refinements. However, I can go back to 2 if I'm feeling more nostalgic, and I do prefer its music just a tiny bit more. Don't get me wrong, while the stuff Graham Norgate did in Future Perfect is still great, there is additional music from Christian Markussen, who did most of the story mode's music. Those are still fine and fit thematically within those levels, it's just that you can really tell the difference between the two composers. Even with that, Future Perfect's soundtrack is still really good despite favoring 2's as a whole. If you enjoyed Timesplitters 2 in any capacity, then it's no-brainer that you should get Future Perfect as well. It's right up there along with 2 as one of my favorite first-person shooters, if only for the laughs I still get while playing the game even after all these years. However, one thing that did suck was during the recording of Future Perfect, my memory card got corrupted and I lost not only my original save data for Future Perfect, but 2 as well. You can imagine how I felt.
Damn it! Spaceman! Oh yeah.
Okay, slight exaggeration. At the very least, it'll give me an excuse to replay these games I love again. And with ending on a pretty high note after Future Perfect, we're now in the downer part of the video, where I explained what happened to Free Radical and why we haven't had a new Timesplitters game ever since. Yay! In 2007, a Timesplitters 4 was announced, but never came to be unfortunately. A lot of factors disrupted the development for 4, such as their cancelled Star Wars Battlefront 3 despite it being nearly completed, and later on Free Radical's biggest elephant in the room, Haze for the PlayStation 3. Which I don't think I need to tell you how well it did, at least not now. So, despite the good reviews Future Perfect got, it sold less than 2. And with Haze flopping and the cancellation of a big Star Wars game, Free Radical went into bankruptcy. And this was before they could have finished working on an HD version of 2, no less. However, Crytek did acquire the studio and renamed it Crytek UK, which mainly worked on the multiplayer modes for Crysis 2 and 3. While still providing work for the former Free Radical members, financial stability and morale slowly went down as the Timesplitters series was put on hold due to uncertainty if there was even demand for it, and in 2014, Crytek shut down their UK division. And it doesn't end there, as since the studio was working on a new Homefront game, Crytek sold off the Homefront property, despite them buying it from THQ in the first place, to Koch Media, the parent company to the publisher Deep Silver. Fortunately, a new studio named Dambuster Studios was formed and the staff was transferred into that. So the good news is that not everyone lost their jobs. The bad news is that they had to finish Homefront the Revolution, which also didn't do so well. Man, this is turning more into a Matt McMuscles video by the second. But despite all of this, there is a glimmer of hope within that Homefront game. About 3/4 into the game, you can find an interactable arcade machine tucked away in a dark corner and, well... yeah, there is a fully functional Timesplitters 2 Easter egg in this game, where you can play the first 2 story levels and even the cartridge minigames in glorious HD. Granted, the sound emulates as if it's coming from the arcade machine you're playing it on, and getting to this requires that you actually play through most of Homefront the Revolution. Knowing this was here was literally the only reason I even got this game, and it's quite frankly a very monotonous semi-open world shooter that I didn't have much fun with. But seeing and playing a what could or might be almost makes it worth it. Almost. And since then, that light of hope is actually getting a little brighter. In August of 2018, THQ Nordic acquired the rights to the Timesplitters franchise, along with, like, a million other abandoned IPs. And if they can bring back Spinks and the Cursed Mummy of all things for a re-release, then I think Timesplitters has a good chance. Not only that, but about a year later, it was announced that Steve Ellis joined THQ Nordic to spearhead the future of the series, and is indeed working on an upcoming Timesplitters product. As to what it'll be, we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm hoping for HD remasters first, and if those do well enough, it could warrant a new title. Plus, there is a fan project that's been in the works since 2012, Timesplitters Rewind, a PC remake of the trilogy that actually got permission from Crytek UK. Progress has been slow due to it being a passion project by a small team, but it has gotten recent updates, even getting one for this January in fact, showcasing the current build in the works, and it does look promising. I just hope that it does get released in some form someday, and that it doesn't conflict with whatever the official Timesplitters product will be. and assuming THQ is cool with it, wouldn't want another Metroid AM2R situation in terms of fan remakes. Regardless of whenever we get anything new from Timesplitters, I can still look back on the original games with delight as they are still fun games to play, whether by yourself in the single-player modes and with bots, or with friends in perhaps some of the most frantic fun you can have in first-person shooters together. The series may have been dropped off the face of the earth after the third game, but it's still a solid trilogy of shooters I can't recommend enough, and it may finally get its proper resurgence that the series deserves soon. Here's hoping. That about does it for the Timesplitters games, at least for now. So I'll see you all in the next video. Whoa, it actually worked! Unreal? How?
Oh, right! After we last talked, a future version of myself appeared and gave me this time device. So now we can actually play those games together for your video.
That's cool and all, but you got here after I just finished, not before.
What? Oh, damn it!
Also, you realize what you're gonna have to do, right?
Which is...
You're gonna have to go back in time, give that time device to your past self, and convince him to go here in order to complete the time loop.
Really? This is the most pointless time loop ever.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to do that at some point unless you want a time paradox on your hands. But since you are here, maybe we could do a collaboration on Haze? Go figure. I would rather do time traveling nonsense instead of playing Haze again, too.